Hi there, my name is Antha Williams, and I lead the Bloomberg Philanthropies Global Climate and Environment Program. I'm really excited to be joined virtually today by an esteemed panel of climate leaders to discuss the future of climate action here in the United States as we anticipate President-elect Biden's inauguration just 41 days from now. First, I want to start by introducing our panel. I'm proud to share the screen today with Gina McCarthy, the 13th administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency under President Obama, and now President and CEO of the Natural Resources Defense Council. Bill Ritter, the 41st governor of the state of Colorado and the founder and director of the Center for the New Energy Economy at Colorado State University. Congresswoman Haley Stevens, representing Michigan's 11th congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives, and Mayor Marty Walsh, the mayor of the city of Boston, and recently appointed the chair of U.S. Climate Mayors. Thank you all so much for joining me. We'll make this as interactive as possible, so I have questions for each of the panelists, but I'll invite you to kick questions and comments to each other as well, and we will have some time for audience questions. So I'll kick the first question over to you, Gina. December 2nd, of course, marked the 50-year anniversary of the Environmental Protection Agency. And as you know better than anyone else, the mission of that agency is to protect public health and the environment. But it has been pretty off track for the last several years. So what can President-elect Biden do to get the EPA back on track?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for letting me be here and with all the other esteemed panelists. It's great to be here. First of all, I think you were being pretty generous. Let's make it clear. EPA has been totally out of the picture, and never mind just off track for the past 4 years. And so the most important thing that we can do is work that I think has already been started. President Biden has really developed the most aggressive climate plan that we have ever seen for a president coming into office. I think he ought to do it. Every single thing in there is good for us, good for the planet, will help public health and help restore the kind of mission of EPA. But in terms of EPA itself, you know, it's time to get our Anthony Fauci of the environment as our administrator. You know, we need to be done with dismantling the science and ignoring it. It is all about going back to fact-based decisions, making science-based decisions. And I think you need to send that signal right out of the gate with somebody that you trust, who can rebuild that agency, because it's in tough shape right now. You know, we have had many people leave. We take science off of the webpage so that the public can't access it. They're doing everything they can over their last few weeks to turn back the clock decades in terms of what EPA can do and is supposed to do with the laws that it is required to implement. And so we need to really send a strong signal and then rebuild the agency. And obviously, standard setting has to be one of the key things that you do. That's what EPA is all about. So you can't just think big thoughts. You have to put them into action. That means new car rules right away. We got to get at transportation. It's the #2 biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. Let's go for it. You got to reinstitute standards in the power sector, because basically Biden sent an extraordinarily strong signal in his plan and said that by 2035, we're going to have clean energy. Well, that means now, and that means aggressive enough that you achieve that target in 2035. So there are so many things that he has authority and responsibility to do. And lastly, there's many things to do, but his all-of-government approach, I think, is going to be one of the most useful and engaging opportunities, because even if the Senate doesn't go his way, and even if there is no interest in the kind of stimulus we need, because the Senate isn't in the control of somebody who wants to do that, then we have to use the authority of the federal government writ large, and it exists. We spend $4.79 trillion in the 2020 budget. That's a lot of money if you think about directing it towards a future of clean energy that's better for us, not just the planet.
There's some great meaty points there that I want to come back to, including the significance of the Biden-Harris commitment to 100% clean energy by 2035 and the important signal that that has sent to the rest of the world. But next, I want to kick it over to you, Governor Ritter, just to talk about, from your perspective, having led a state, working with a lot of Western governors in particular, during this period of time where the federal government has been moving completely in the opposite direction from what the science says we need on climate change, states have really taken the lead in making their own climate commitments. I know there's now, up from just a couple states 2 years ago that had 100% clean energy commitments to now a handful of states and territories. So can you just speak to what states have been doing and how you think the Biden-Harris administration can work most effectively to build on that progress and really accelerate it?
Yeah, sure, Antha. You're right. States have really taken the lead, particularly over the last 4 years. It was it was not that way, or there were states that were not very active. And the 2018 elections, we saw a number of governors run on 100% clean, on 100% renewable, on big emissions reduction target. Most of them won their elections, and then we saw a lot of state legislators do the same. And so in 2019, we saw several states actually set targets or goals that were emissions targets or renewable portfolio standard targets or whatever. They were very, very ambitious and line up, I think, with Biden's climate plan. So states have done a variety of really important things. There are 25 states that are part of the United States Climate Alliance, where the governors have signed on. That's half of the states, and they cover a significant portion of the population. But to pick up where Gina left off, there's also 23 states, I think, with low-emitting vehicle standards, LEV standards. There are 10 that have ZEV, zero-emitting vehicle standards. And, those were all in peril because of the litigation from the Trump administration trying to litigate the California waiver that was part of the Clean Air Act when it was first passed in the early 70s. And that now, I think, is all going to be reversed. And we've seen big automakers as well pull out of that alliance that were pressing that litigation. And so we're going to see states be able to do what they need to do to even get out ahead of the EPA with zero emitting vehicle, lower emitting vehicle standards. And those are the kinds of things that states have been or are willing to do because of state action and because of market economics. We've got like 57 major utilities in America that have set their own emissions target reduction. Nobody would have believed that 10 years ago. So that's a big thing to happen in the last 10 years. And interesting, in the last 4 years, most of those targets were set while Trump was being hostile toward the clean energy and really toward climate action. And now you have major utilities and states all acting in a way that says we have to do this, we have to do it as quickly as we can. And so I think what you'll see are states hoping for this willing partner at the federal government so that we can work together sort of as federalism was intended to do in trying to tackle this very big problem in a way that's 180 degrees different than the Trump administration of the last 4 years.
That's a really important point, and the market signal that these strong state actions send, so that the private sector sees the writing on the wall and is moving in that direction because it makes sense,
right.
And it's profitable as well as the right thing to do. Over to you, Congresswoman Stevens. Other countries are starting to set very ambitious goals. We saw China, of course, set a net zero goal by 2060, followed in short order by South Korea and Japan setting their own net zero emissions goals. And, they're making massive federal investments in emerging technologies in order to meet those goals. So from where you sit on the federal side, what can the U.S. do to catch up?
Yeah, well, I sit on two sides of this. One is the Michigan side as well as the federal side. And of course, Governor Ritter gave a nice jumping off place with a federal government that's going to act cohesively, to Gina's point, with the standards and the holistic all of government, all of country approach. We obviously know we need to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. The House of Representatives voted on that last year. You think of the irony of just 2 years ago being in a government shutdown with the EPA largely shuttered, and the time that was lost with the emission standards, particularly the testing. And we're over at the North American Auto Show with vehicles looking to get off the platform, but yet they can't because they can't go through the testing center. And that's just lost time. And this is something that I think we have to have a reckoning around functional good government that is actually at the table. So when you look at the international indexes that you just laid out, Antha, obviously the United States needs to be at the table. You can talk about America first, but it's got to be America at the table, America in leadership, setting the stage. Where I come from, we see the automakers with big goals, similar to what Governor Ritter just mentioned with our energy companies. You talk to any major automaker and they're going to tell you, we recognize where the world is moving. 300 million, just in being invested, indexing to where China's going, indexing to where the international consumer base is going. And so we've obviously got to keep pace. We've got to look at where the American consumer base is going to go. And Joe Biden, President-elect Joe Biden, has been setting those goals. And where Congress, particularly our Democratic majority, is looking towards is not just the legislative agenda, which is certainly really exciting and somewhere where we need to go, passing real legislation, but also having agencies that employ scientists and are agencies that we can actually work with to achieve these goals and continue to be leaders at the international table. That's great what South Korea is doing. It's so inspiring. We want the United States either working in partnership or setting our own goals that the rest of the world is going to continue to look at. And what we're seeing is that industry is moving there as well.
That's terrific. Thanks for that. Mayor Walsh, I'm going to turn it over to you. You have done a ton of work on these issues, of course, as mayor of Boston, including thinking about the not just the climate opportunity, but also the opportunity to provide good jobs as part of the mix in meeting our goals on climate change. As I mentioned at the outset, you're the incoming chair of U.S. climate mayors. And so both in Boston, but for the broader set of cities that you're leading on these issues, what are your priorities for city leaders as we think about the Biden administration's commitments to move to net zero by 2035?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on here. I'm on an esteemed panel, and it's great to be on with all of you. And I want to just recognize Gina just received an award from an organization in Boston, A Better City. And she's been a good friend to Boston, a good friend to me, and a good friend to the environment and the country. So thank you, Gina, for all your great work. Now, I think it's imperative at this point in time that our recovery from COVID-19 be equitable. And I think it's going to include public health, public safety, racial justice, and a healthy environment. And that's what we're going to have to do. I think it's important that we have to act now when it comes to climate in order to prevent irreversible damage to our communities. Certainly, we don't really want to talk about the last almost 4 years here that we've turned the clock back. We have work to do. I think the one thing that I would say that Climate Mayors was created in 2014 by Eric Garcetti, myself, and a handful of mayors. And today we have over 460 mayors. So when Gina was at the EPA, there was mayors involved in climate resiliency. But today we have an infrastructure throughout the United States of America of over 460 mayors ready to hit the ground running. I mean, this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, believes in science. We're excited about that. We're excited about partnering, working together. We're excited about not just hitting our goals, but actually doing the work that needs to happen right now. In Boston, we talked about the other day, we have many climate programs that we're reducing carbon emission. We're going to choice energy, electricity. We have a plan for Boston Harbor. So now it's time to as an organization, whether it's climate mayors or mayors individually around the country, to really have an administration that we want to move forward on our plans. We want to reduce carbon emissions. We want to make sure that we think about electrifying our public transit. We need to make sure that we're protecting our coastline. We need to make sure that we're dealing with heat deserts all across America. That's what has to happen. I mean, climate's real. Climate change is real. And the impacts is the biggest threat to human beings in this world. And that's no different for here in the United States of America. So I am excited about what the future holds. But that excitement can only last for a short period of time. There is lots of work that we need to do. There was lots of work we needed to do before President Trump got elected president. And that work in some cases has been stalled. So we have to catch up.
Thanks for those comments. And you mentioned the fact that as a local leader, you're facing these multiple challenges at the same time: recovery, economic recession, the fight for racial equality, and the impacts of climate change, all at the exact same time. So I want to turn it over to each of you just to speak to that. I'll start with you, Gina, but I'll let others kind of jump in. You know, one of the things that NRDC has been working on at the local level is how you craft policy solutions to climate change that also address environmental justice and equity. What do you think are some of the top areas of opportunity in addressing these multiple challenges at the exact same time?
Well, Antha, first of all, let me thank my mayor for continuing the incredible progress in Boston. I'm just so proud of you. And I think we absolutely balance off the Midwest accent without question. Maybe not. You know, I think, Antha, the thing that surprised me most as somebody who's been in the environmental world for a long time is the fact that people actually didn't know US EPA is a public health agency. That's essentially what we do. And those headlines that talked about who was in the, you know, basically being impacted most by COVID-19 just made it very clear that, you know, when you have a public health crisis, which climate change is, it's always the Black and brown community, the low-income community, our indigenous communities that suffer the most. And one of the best things about the Biden plan was his absolute commitment to say 40% of the investments that we are going to make on climate are going to go to environmental justice communities to improve their stature, to grow jobs, to make sure that we listen to the kind of solutions they want. And I think the really important thing to remember is that we do have solutions now. We don't need to go in a laboratory and start stirring something up. We have things already on the shelves that we can move forward. One of the reasons why we're so excited to be part of ACCC, the American Climate Cities Challenge, is that we know mayors are like crazy doing what democracy says, right? You are the place where innovation happens. And so NRDC's job is to nurture that innovation, to prove that it grows jobs, to prove that it impacts people's health in a positive way, and that it can build constituencies that will go further and further and demand more and more, which is why you ladder it up to the state level, which is Bill's expertise. He knows that you got to prove things locally to make it happen at the state level. And then when you prove the state, things can move at the federal government level. And so I don't want everyone to think that all of a sudden this is just going to miraculously, the federal government comes in and sweeps in and does things. It never happens that way. But the awesome thing is that we need to grow jobs. We need to invest now in order to provide economic stability. We need to be part of the world community. We need to build and do manufacturing in our country again, which all says that our investments over the next few years are going to chart the course of the future, not just for the US economy, but for the world, because that's how big we are, and that's what the stage we're going to be operating on once again. And if we do this right, clean energy is the horse that's going to take us into the future. That's the engine of growing jobs. That's the engine that's going to clean up our cities. You know, it is not a painful opportunity. It is an opportunity for progress. And so I'm just deathly afraid that we're going to give any room in this conversation that we're going to have over the next 4 years for somebody to say, if we invest in climate, we're going to kill jobs, or we're going to slow down the economy, or it's just going to help the wealthy, which is all just nonsense. Fundamentally, this has to be about the challenge of racism holding communities back, those communities getting advantaged, our ability to grow jobs everywhere, not just where it's easy to do, our investment in manufacturing again, our investment in infrastructure, which is falling apart in so many communities, and our recognition that all of that is part and parcel of how we hand our children a bright future. So we have to own this narrative. We cannot let the naysayers take it over.
Those are great comments. And oh, sure, go ahead. And then I'll turn over to you because I know you're facing these issues in Michigan too. Yeah, go ahead, Mayor.
You know, Gina brings up a good point. The green infrastructure, investments in green infrastructure obviously addresses climate. There's a huge opportunity here to create hundreds of thousands of jobs in green building, resilient infrastructure, drawing on incredible talent and innovation of American people. We're going through, I can speak for Boston, going through this pandemic. About a third of our hospitality workers aren't coming back to work. People that work in our restaurants, people that work in our hotels, people that work in different industries. There is an amazing opportunity in cities like Boston and across America. We're positioned to help lead and implement this vision. Federal aid is critical, whether it's implementing nature-based solutions to protect our coastlines or training people in the green economy. I agree with Gina. I think I hear as mayor, there's another side here you hear that's too often trying to pull down the investments that people want to make. Climate investments up in front, and it's very important to understand this, that for every $1 billion that we spent in climate resiliency, we saved $19 billion in mitigation of disaster relief. And that's something that is real. And the fact that we have a partner finally in the White House that understands this and recognizes this bold action. The governor talked about the importance of governors and the importance of states stepping up and having plans. They have plans, cities have plans, the Congress is ready to act. We're at a unique moment in history and time for us to really take bold action. And I think looking at and not being afraid, Gina's absolutely right. Let's not be afraid of the climate. Let's embrace the climate and let's go out there and really think about what the future of our country's economics is going to look like. This is as much about economics in some cases, our economy, as it is in protecting our cities and our states and our country.
Representative Stevens, I wonder if you want to come in here from the Michigan perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, it could have been Marty or I going next, because it's such a point about the role too that cities play and have continued to play in terms of what Gina was talking about, which is the infrastructure guarantee. The infrastructure guarantee of, certainly in Michigan, we care a lot about the roadways, and we've actually been struggling with maintaining our roadways, our bridges. We had a dam break, but it's also the clean air and fresh water to drink. And we see a disparity where certain zip codes on health inequities and different investments that get entangled, but yet my water lines in my suburban district, I represent the suburbs of Detroit, are tied to the city of Detroit. And so our boil water advisory, right? And we're getting in the weeds here on infrastructure, but it's also tied to the bigger picture of where we need to go as a country, and to address what I think has been so nicely said here about racial inequities and broadly on infrastructure. And look, we're going to have the public-private partnership. I think, and Gina knows this all too well, the grand bargain that needs to get cut by bringing the companies along. You pay the price when you don't have the leadership at the helm in terms of federal government. So what did we see most recently? Well, we saw industry being divided in two. We see the standards going every which way. We see the rest of the world moving in a certain way. I'm talking about MPG here, and our big carbon goals and what we need to do on energy. There's a reawakening moment right now in the Midwest as it pertains to energy efficiency and where we need to go and where the investment is going to come and how that gets spurred. Couldn't agree with the mayor more that we are absolutely at a very energetic and an inspiring moment. And in fact, having served in the Obama administration during another downturn in our economy, we're going to be able to springboard from those lessons learned and some of those initial successes and be able to do big and bold. I believe that we can achieve Vice President Biden, now President-elect Biden's climate goals as it pertains to our manufacturing and infrastructure needs in a place called Michigan.
Thanks for those remarks.
Antha?
Yeah, please do.
Just think about it again this way. So we talked about those 57 major utilities that have these ambitious targets. You got the Biden administration saying 2035 is going to be net zero power in the electricity sector. There's going to be a massive cash infusion. And that cash, if spent the right way, and if it dovetails with a stimulus or with other public spending, can be public-private infusion of cash and spent in places where there are marginalized communities or disadvantaged communities, communities of color, many places that have carbon resources still burning. So we have to take the coal out of those resources, make sure we don't build new fossil fuel in those communities, and at the same time, use that infusion to actually create wealth in the communities. The environmental justice folks that I've talked to said a lot of times, you know, we worry about affordability. The utility sector thinks, oh, if we keep rates low, that's environmental justice. That's not. It's what Gina said. It's workforce training, but it's also wealth creation in communities that have been disadvantaged. And we have like this 10 to 15 year period where we're going to spend a lot of money, and we spend it the right way. We address public health and we address environmental justice and racism in these communities that's been systemic in many respects, and rebuild an economy for everybody. We really have this opportunity to weave those strands of the braid together. And I think the Biden administration understands this probably better than anybody before.
I wonder, you know, the infusion of cash, the opportunity for the public-private partnerships, as has been mentioned, is sort of one side of the coin, the jobs creation potential. On the flip side is the incredible budget crunch that many states and localities are experiencing. And so as you think about the sort of policy levers for making a difference in that, you know, area of just significant budget constraints locally, you know, what are some of the opportunities for addressing that?
Well, it's been mentioned before, but there are enormous economic opportunities around rebuilding the infrastructure in this country. There's job and wealth creation opportunities there. There are opportunities to transition out of fossil fuels into the clean infrastructure that's necessary. But as the Congresswoman mentioned, energy efficiency is the #1 opportunity that still is in front of us in terms of spending a little bit of money to have big things that can happen. We saw it in ARA funding. The amount of money that was available for energy efficiency had huge returns that was available then to the economies in states. And so just think about these as investments. And you're right, states and localities often and right now have huge budget crunches, but there are ways to spend those dollars that have returns. And a transition to a clean energy economy is not a net zero game. You don't lose you don't lose jobs in order to do the transition. In fact, you build the economy that way. And that's really the opportunity in front of us.
And I think we just need to appropriate the dollars effectively to you, Gov and Marty. We'll work on that in Congress.
but I think we can't look at the money as a way of putting up a roadblock. And I think that we have to think creatively about this. I think that, you know, when you think about the investments that need to happen and where's the money going to come from, some of it is going to be a relationship with a public-private partnership. So some of it's going to be philanthropic money. Some of it's going to be federal money. Some of it's going to be state and city money. And I'll give you one quick example. Anyone has a chance, Google Resilient Boston Harbor. We have a plan to build a 47-mile coastline buffer connecting people back to the harbor. And two of the projects, or three of the projects on that, one is one of our vulnerability points is in the north end of Boston. And we just did over a park. So our Parks and Recreation Department just redid a park, a new baseball field, softball fields. And what we did was we raised the field 4 feet. And now what that is, that's a buffer. As sea level rises, the park is there to protect from keeping the water coming into this part of Boston. We also built another park on the South Boston waterfront, Martin's Park, named after Martin Richard, the little boy who lost his life in the Marathon bombing. And that park is a fully inclusive park for kids with any type of disabilities. And there's a buffer there as well. So it acts as a park. We built it as a park, but we built in some resiliency into that park. And that's all part of our 47 Coastline Park. And now we have 2 projects a little further down the 4-point channel that the private developers are going to be making the investment in continuing that not I wouldn't call it a wall, but that continuing 47-mile of reconnecting people back to the harbor. So I think that we get caught up in this big dollar figure, and it is a big dollar figure, but there's ways through our budgets being creative by doing, whether it's upgrading our transit systems or what have you, and building in infrastructure, green infrastructure into those programs. And that reduces the burden of the debt. And we do need, the private sector needs to step up here, because as we think about protecting investments, we're also protecting their investments. So as new developments go forward, we're looking at doing new green standards moving forward. There's a question in here. There was a question in one of the panelists about reducing carbon. We need to build these buildings cleaner now, and not later on down the road be retrofitting them 20 years from now.
Those are really good points. And you obviously have been a leader in Boston on building performance standards and just the potential for creating good jobs with these deep energy efficiency retrofits, which make healthier buildings, healthier communities, and reduce a whole lot of carbon pollution at the exact same time. We have time for just a quick speed round. So I'm gonna give each of the panelists an opportunity just to say 2 quick sentences about, as you think about the climate opportunity in just the year or 2 that's ahead of us, what are you most focused on? And I'll start with you, Gina.
All right, very quickly. I am most focused on January 20th, having a change in occupancy at the White House. I am interested in making sure that we remain hopeful, that we recognize that every dollar we spend on clean energy in our future is a dollar that also spends on environmental justice communities and those issues, and on good food and on good housing and great cities like the city of Boston staying great. This is all moments in time for us to get more than a dollar for what we put in. We need 2 firsts, 3 firsts, 4 firsts.
I like that, 4 firsts. Over to you, Mayor Walsh.
Paris Climate Agreement 2015, we joined. We were taken out of it. Cities stayed in it. In 2021, we're back in there to protect the planet, protect America, protect Boston, protect the world.
That's great. Thank you. Governor Ritter.
So I'm going to be focused on states still, focused on governors, but particularly, Antha, trying to take the politics out of this conversation, to depoliticize this so that both sides of the aisle understand why we're doing this and why it's important that we act quickly.
That's terrific. And Representative Stevens.
After Paris, the forging of unlikely alliances to meet our goals, bring all stakeholders to the table, and continue to deliver for our big climate goals as a country.